Hello everyone. So this is theme 5 through the eyes of traveler perception of society that is from the 10th to 17th century. Women and men have traveled in search of work to escape from natural disasters जैसे कि कोई डिजास्टर आ गया ट्रेडर्स की तरह मर्चेंट सोल्जर प्रीस्ट पिलग्रिम और ड्रिवन बाय सेंस ऑफ एडवेंचर। तो इन सारे वर्क के लिए मेन एंड वुमेन एक जगह से दूसरी जगह ट्रैवल करते थे। Those who visit or come to stay in a new land invariably encounter a world that is completely different in terms of the landscape, physical environment, custom, language, belief, and practice of people. Many of them try to adapt to these differences. Others, somewhat exceptional, note them carefully in account, generally recording what they find unusual or remarkable. Unfortunately, we have practically no accounts of travel left by women through, though we know that they travel. देखो, वुमेन भी ट्रैवल करते थे लेकिन हमें उनके ज़्यादा अकाउंट्स मिलते नहीं और हमें पता है कि वो ट्रैवल करते थे। ठीक है, द अकाउंट दैट सर्वाइव आर ऑफन वेरीड इन टर्म्स ऑफ देयर सब्जेक्ट मैटर। सम डील विद द अफेयर्स ऑफ द कोर्ट वाइल अदर्स आर मेनली फोकस्ड ऑन रिलीजियस इशू, आर्किटेक्चरल फीचर्स, monument. For example, one of the most important description of the city of Vijayanagar in the 15th century comes from Abdur Razzaq Samarkandi, who was a diplomat who came visiting from Herat. तो विजयनगर के बारे में किसने लिखा है? अब्दुल रज़ाक समरकंदी. In a few cases, traveler did not go to distant land. For example, in the Mughal Empire, administrators sometimes traveled within the empire and recorded their observation. Some of them were interested in looking at popular customs, folklore, traditions, or their own land. In this chapter, we shall see our knowledge of the past can be enriched through a consideration of description of social life provided by traveler. So historians क्या करते हैं बेसिकली जो इन ट्रैवलर्स ने जो भी लिखा हुआ है उससे चीज़ों को समझने की कोशिश करते थे कि उस वक्त की सोसाइटी की लाइफ कैसी थी। provided by travelers who visited the subcontinent, focusing on the accounts of three men, that is अल-बरूनी। अल-बरूनी कहाँ से आए थे? उज्बेकिस्तान। कौन सी सेंचुरी में? 11th सेंचुरी। अल-बरूनी उज्बेकिस्तान 11th सेंचुरी। इब्न बतूता मोरक्को मोरक्को इन नॉर्थ वेस्ट अफ्रीका से आए थे 14th सेंचुरी। ठीक है, तो पहले कौन आया था? अल-बरूनी 11th सेंचुरी, फिर इब्न बतूता 14th सेंचुरी, उसके बाद फिर फ्रेंचमैन फ्रैंकोइस बर्नियर 17th सेंचुरी। दिस इज द कोकोनट एंड द पान वर थिंग दैट स्ट्रक मेनी ट्रैवलर्स एज अनयूजुअल। ठीक है, as these authors came from vastly different social and cultural environment, they were often more attentive to everyday activities, the practices which were taken for granted by indigenous writers, for whom these were routine matters, not worthy of being recorded. It is this difference in perspective that makes the account of traveler interesting. Who did this traveler write for? As we will see, the answer vary from one instance to the next. Al-Biruni described, Al-Biruni कब आए थे? 11th century. Described his work as a help to those who want to discuss religious questions with them and as a repertory of information to those who want to associate with them. So Al-Biruni की बात करते हैं, उन्होंने एक बुक लिखी थी किताबुल हिंद. So from Khwarizm to the Punjab. Al-Biruni was born in 1973. कहाँ पर? Khwarizm in present day Uzbekistan. Khwarizm was an important center of learning. Al-Biruni received the best education available at that time. He was very well versed in several languages: Syriac, Arabic, Persian, Hebrew, Sanskrit. Although he did not know Greek, he was familiar with the works of Plato and other Greek philosophers, having read them in Arabic translation. In 117, when Sultan Mahmud invaded Khwarizm, कौन किसने कब्जा किया था ख्वारिज़म पे? सुल्तान महमूद. He took several scholars and poets back to his capital, that is गजनी. तो वहाँ से बहुत सारे क्या लेके आए थे? स्कॉलर्स और पोएट को जो है वो वहाँ से उठा ले आए थे। किसी थे? सुल्तान महमूद. कहाँ पे ले आए? ख्वारिज़म से गजनी. As a hostage, but gradually developed a liking for the city, where he spent the rest of his life until his death at the age of 70. It was in Ghazni that Al-Biruni developed an interest in India. This was not unusual. Sanskrit works on astronomy, mathematics and medicine had been translated into Arabic from the 8th century onward. तो बेसिकली अरेबिक में बहुत सारे वर्क जो हैं संस्कृत के ट्रांसलेट हुए थे, तो बड़े इंटरेस्टिंग थे वो सब. सो व्हेन द पंजाब बिकेम अ पार्ट ऑफ द गजनाविद एम्पायर, कॉन्टैक्ट विद द लोकल पॉपुलेशन, इट हेल्प क्रिएट एन इन्वायरमेंट ऑफ म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट एंड अंडरस्टैंडिंग. तो उन्होंने जब अटैक किया तो म्यूचुअल कॉन्टैक्ट हुआ, जिसकी वजह से ट्रस्ट बढ़ा और अंडरस्टैंडिंग बढ़ी. Al-Biruni spent years in the company of Brahmin priests and scholars, learning Sanskrit and studying religious and philosophical texts. While his itinerary is not clear, His itinerary is not clear. It is likely that he traveled widely in the Punjab and parts of the northern India. Travel literature was already an accepted part of the Arabic literature by the time he wrote. This literature dealt with the land as far apart as the Sahara Desert in the west to the river Volga in the. तो ये जो लिटरेचर है कहाँ कौन कौन सी लैंड से डील करता था, फ्रॉम द सहारा डेजर्ट इन द वेस्ट टू रिवर वोल्गा इन द नॉर्थ. सो वाइल few people in India have read Al-Biruni before 1500, many others outside India may have done so. Al-Biruni's expertise in several languages allowed him to compare language and translate text. He translated several Sanskrit works, including Patanjali's work on grammar, into Arabic. For his Brahmana friend, he translated the works of Euclid, that is a Greek mathematician, into Sanskrit. नेक्स्ट आता है किताब. अल-बिरूनी ने बुक रखी लिखी किताब उल हिंद. इट वॉज रिटन इन अरेबिक. इट्स वेरी सिंपल एंड ल्यूसिड. इट इज़ वॉल्यूमिनस टेक्स्ट डिवाइडेड इनटू 80 चैप्टर्स ऑन सब्जेक्ट्स सच रिलीजन, फिलॉसफी, फेस्टिवल, एस्ट्रोनॉमी, alchemy, manners and customs, social life, weight measures, iconography, laws and metrology. Generally, though not always, Al-Biruni adopted a distinctive structure in each chapter, beginning with a question, following this up with a description based on Sanskritic tradition, and concluding with a comparison with other culture. Some present-day scholars have argued that this almost geometric structure, remarkable for its precision and predictability, owed much to his mathematical orientation. देखो तो बेसिकली अपनी राइटिंग में वो एक जेमेट्रिकल स्ट्रक्चर फॉलो करते थे, एंड दैट वाज वेरी रिमार्केबल बिकॉज इट वाज वेरी प्रिसाइज एंड प्रिडिक्टेबल. एंड व्हाई? बिकॉज ही ओड much to this mathematical orientation. Al-Biruni, who wrote in Arabic, probably intended his work for peoples living along the frontiers of the subcontinent. He was familiar with the translation and adaptation of Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit texts into Arabic. These range from fables to works on astronomy, medicine. However, he was also critical about the ways in which these texts were written and clearly wanted to improve on them. Metrology is the science of measurement. The term Hindu was derived from Old Persian word that is from 6th-5th centuries BC to refer to the region east of the river Sindhu. The Arabs continued with the Persian usage and called this region as Al-Hind and its people Hindi. Later, the Turks अरब क्या कहते थे? पर्सियन, अल हिंद, और इनके पीपल को कहते थे हिंदी. Later, Turks refer to the people east of the Indus as इंडस के जो भी ईस्ट पे रहता था टर्क्स उनको हिंदू कहते थे, उनकी लैंड को हिंदुस्तानी कहते थे, हिंदुस्तान कहते थे, लैंग्वेज को हिंदावी. नन ऑफ दिस एक्सप्रेशन इंडिकेट इज द रिलीजियस आइडेंटिटी ऑफ द पीपल. इट वाज मच लेटर द टर्म डेवलप्ड रिलीजियस कॉन्टेशन. This is an illustration from a 13th century Arabic manuscript showing the Athenian statesman and poet Solon, who lived in the 6th century BC, addressing a student. ठीक है. अब हम लोग बात करते हैं इब्न बतूता, रिहाला लिखी थी उन्होंने. सो अल-बिरूनी 11th सेंचुरी, किताब उल हिंद. पहले ख्वारिज़म में उनका बर्थ हुआ था 973 के आसपास. 117 में अटैक किया था किसने? सुल्तान महमूद ऑफ गजनवी, और ये सारे पोर्ट वगैरह लेके गए थे. इंडिया से जब टच हुआ तो इंडिया में वो आए, उन्होंने बुक लिखी जिसका नाम था किताब उल हिंद. इब्न बतूता ने रियाला लिखी. इब्न बतूता बुक ऑफ ट्रैवल्स कॉल्ड रियाला रिटन इन अरेबिक. उनकी भी अरेबिक में लिखी थी, इनकी भी. प्रोवाइड्स एक्सट्रीमली रिच एंड वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग डिटेल्स अबाउट द सोशल एज वेल एज द कल्चरल लाइफ इन द सबकॉन्टिनेंट in the 14th century. This Morocco traveler was born in Tangier into one of the most respectable and educated families known for their expertise in Islamic religious law or Sharia. True to their tradition of his family, Ibn Battuta received literary and scholastic education when he was quite young. Unlike most of the members of his class, Ibn Battuta considered experience gained through traveling to be more important source of knowledge than books. He just loved traveling and went to far off places, exploring new worlds and people. Before he set off for India in 1330s, he came in 14th century. That is 1332 से 33 के बीच में आए थे. He had made pilgrimage trips to Makkah and had already traveled extensively in Syria, Iraq, Persia, Yemen, Oman, and a few trading ports on the coast of East Africa. Traveling overland through Central Asia, Ibn Battuta reached Sindh. कब आए थे सिंध? 1333 में. He had heard about Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the Sultan of Delhi, and lured by his reputation as a very generous patron of art and letter. He set off for Delhi, passing through the Multan and Ouch. The Sultan was impressed by his scholarship and appointed him the Qazi or the judge of Delhi. He remained in the position for several years until he fell out of favor and was thrown into prison. Once the misunderstanding between him and the Sultan was cleared, he was restored to imperial service and was ordered in 1342 to proceed to China as the Sultan's envoy to the Mongol ruler. With the new assignment, Ibn Battuta proceeded to the Malabar coast through the central India. From Malabar, he went to the Maldives, where he stayed for 18 months as the Qazi, but eventually he decided to proceed to Sri Lanka. He then went back once more to the Malabar coast and then Maldives, and before resuming his mission to China, he visited Bengal and Assam as well. He took a ship to Sumatra, from where another ship for the Chinese port town of Zayutin. Zayutin जैसे आज कहते हैं Guangzhou, ठीक है, Jaytun. He traveled extensively in China, going as far as Beijing, but did not stay for long. Decided to return home in 1347. His account is often compared with that of Marco Polo, who visited China and also India. तो मार्को पोलो कहाँ गए थे? चाइना और इंडिया, और ये भी गए थे, इंडिया गए थे, फिर चाइना गए थे, वापस आ गए थे 1347 में फ्रॉम हिज होम बेस इन वेनिस. तो मार्को पोलो वेनिस में इन द लेट 13th century. इब्न बतूता meticulously recorded his observation about new culture, people, belief, उनकी values. We need to bear in mind that this globe trotter was traveling in the 14th century when it was much more arduous and hazardous to travel than it is today. According to Ibn Battuta, it took 40 days to travel from Multan to Delhi and about 50 days from Sindh to Delhi. The distance from the Daulatabad to Delhi was covered in 48 days, while that from the Gwalior to Delhi took 10 days. So this is a boat we carry passengers. This is a terracotta sculpture from a temple in Bengal, 17th to 18th century. Now this one also important. These are uh, robbers attacking travelers, a 16th century Mughal painting. Riala Sikh accepted that my departure from Tangia, my birthplace, took place on Thursday. I set out alone, having neither fellow traveller nor caravan whose party I might join, but I swayed by an overmastering impulse within me, and I desired, long cherished in my bosom, to visit these illustrious sanctuaries. So I braced my resolution to quit all my dear ones, females, males, and forsook my home as birds forsake their nest. My age at that time was 22 years. Ibn Battuta returned home in 1354, about 30 years after he had set out. Okay. Robbers were not the only hazard on long journey. The traveler could feel homesick or fall ill. Isn't it an except for Riela? I was attacked by the fever and actually tied myself on the saddle with a turban cloth in case I should fall off by reason of my weakness. So at last, we reached the town of Tuni, and the townsfolk came out to welcome the Sheikh and the son of a Qazi. On all sides they came forward with greeting and question to one another, but not a soul said a word of greeting to me, since there were none of them I knew. I felt so sad at heart on account of my loneliness that I could not restrain the tears that started to my eyes, and wept bitterly. But one of the pilgrims, realizing the cause of my distress, came to me with a greeting. Places visited by Ibn Battuta in Afghanistan, Sindh and Punjab. Many of the place names have been spelled as Ibn Battuta would have known them. अंडकोय बल्क तिरमिद, ठीक है. फिर कंधार गए, इस अंधकोय तिरमिद आए होंगे, बल्क आए होंगे, कुंदुज, परवान, काबुल, गजना, कंधार, ऊजा, मुल्तान, औजता, ये अरेबियन सी है, लहारी, इंडस रिवर को फॉलो करते करते आए. ऊजा, मुल्तान गए, अजूधान गए, अबुहार, सरस्वती, Hansi, Delhi पहुंच गए. Traveling was also very insecure. Ibn Battuta was attacked by bands of rebels several times. In fact, he preferred traveling in a caravan along with companions, but did not deter highway robbers. While traveling from Multan to Delhi, for instance, his caravan was attacked and many of his fellow travelers lost their lives. Those who travelers were survived, including Mulita, were severely wounded. The enjoyment of curiosity. As we have seen, the Ibn Battuta was an inveterate traveler who spent several years traveling through North Africa. He spent several years traveling through North Africa, West Asia, part of Central Asia. He may even have visited Russia. तो कहाँ कहाँ गए थे? North Africa, West Asia, part of Central Asia, the Indian subcontinent, China, before returning to his native land, Morocco. When he returned, the local rulers issued instruction that his stories be recorded. फिर education and environment. This is what Ibn Juzay, who was deputy to write that Ibn Battuta dictated, said in his introduction. A gracious direction was transmitted by the ruler that he Ibn Battuta, should dictate an account of the cities which he had been seen in his travel and of the interesting events which had clung to his memory, and that he should speak to speak of those whom he had met of the rulers of countries, of their distinguished men of learning and their pious saint. Accordingly, literature upon these subjects are narrative which give entertainment to the mind and delight to the eye, ear and eyes, with a variety of curious particulars by the exposition of which he gave edification of marvelous thing, by referring to which he aroused interest. In the footsteps of Ibn Battuta, in the centuries between 1400 and 1800, visitors to India wrote a number of travelogues in Persian. At the same time, Indian visitors to Central Asia, Iran, and Ottoman Empire also sometimes wrote about their experiences. These writers followed the footsteps of Al-Biruni, उन्होंने कौन सी बुक लिखी? किताब 11th century. Ibn Battuta, 14th century Morocco, and had sometimes read these earlier authors. Among the best known of these writers were Abdul Razak Samarkandi, who visited South India in 1440, Mahmud Wali Balkhi, who travelled very widely in the 1620s, and Sheikh Ali Hasan, who came to North India in 1740s. Some of these authors were fascinated by India, and one of them, Mahmud Balkhi, even became a sort of sannyasi for a time. Others, such as Hazin, were disappointed and even disgusted with India, where they expected to receive a red carpet treatment. Most of them saw India as a land of wonder. तो महमूद वाली बाल्की कब आए थे? 1620 में. शेख अली हसन कब आए थे? 1740. ठीक है. उसके बाद फिर हम लोग यहाँ पे देखते हैं इन 18th century पेंटिंग डिपेक्टिंग ट्रेवलर्स गैदर अराउंड अ कैंप फायर. Okay, nothing important here. Francois Bernier, a doctor with a difference. Once the Portuguese arrived in India in about 1500, a number of them wrote detailed accounts regarding Indian custom, that is social customs and religious practice. A few of them, such as Jesuit Roberto Nobili, even translated Indian texts into European language. तो नाम बताओ. एक पोर्टुगीज़ थे जिनका नाम था जीसूट रॉबर्टो नोबेली. उन्होंने इंडियन टेक्स्ट को यूरोपियन लैंग्वेज में ट्रांसलेट किया था. अमंग द बेस्ट द यूरोपियन पोर्टुगीज राइटर इज डुआर्टे बारबोसा, हु रोट अ डिटेल अकाउंट. डुआर्टे बारबोसा, हु रोट अ डिटेल अकाउंट. उसके बाद फिर अमंग द बेस्ट द यूरोपियन राइटर्स इज डुआर्टे बारबोसा, who wrote a detailed account of the trade as well as society in South India. तो जेसूट रॉबर्टो नोबले आए थे, फिर डुआर्टे बारबोसा ने साउथ इंडिया के बारे में लिखा था. लेटर आफ्टर 1600 वी फाइंड ग्रोइंग नंबर ऑफ डच, इंग्लिश and French travelers coming to India. One of the most famous was the French traveler that is Jean Baptiste Tavernier. ये ज्वेलर थे, फ्रेंच के ज्वेलर थे जिसका नाम था जीन बैप्टाइज टेवर्नियर, who traveled to India at least 6 times. He was particularly fascinated with the trading condition in India, compared India to Iran and the Ottoman Empire. Some of these travelers like the Italian doctor मनुसी. तो यहाँ पे सबके प्रोफेशन लिखे हुए हैं, यहाँ पे ध्यान से देखना. एक है जीन बैप्टाइस्ट, ठीक है, फ्रेंच के थे, ज्वेलर थे, 6 टाइम इंडिया में आए थे. उसके बाद फिर एक और लिखा हुआ है इटालियन डॉक्टर मनुसी, ठीक है. ही नेवर रिटर्न टू यूरोप एंड सेटल डाउन इन इंडिया, ठीक है. ही वॉज डॉक्टर. फ्रैंकोइस बर्नियर वॉज अ फ्रेंच मैन, वॉज अ डॉक्टर. फ्रैंकोइस बर्नियर जो थे वो भी डॉक्टर थे. मनुसी जो थे वो इटालियन डॉक्टर थे. बर्नियर जो है वो फ्रेंच डॉक्टर थे. ही वॉज अ पॉलिटिकल फिलोसफर एंड हिस्टोरियन. लाइक मैनी अदर्स ही केम to the Mughal Empire in search of opportunities. He was in India for 12 years from 1656 to 1668 and was closely associated with the Mughal court as a physician to Prince Dara Shikoh, the eldest son of the Emperor Shah Jahan, and later as an intellectual and scientist with Danishmand Khan. Later as a एल्डर सन ऑफ एम्प्रेस शाहजहाँ. पहले तो उनके फिजिशियन थे, फिर इंटेलेक्ट एंड साइंटिस्ट विद दानिशमंद खान एंड अर्मेनियन नॉवल इन द मुगल कोड. तो कई लोगों के बारे में पढ़ा. बर्नियर, फ्रैंकोइस बर्नियर फ्रेंचमैन थे, डॉक्टर थे, दारा सिकोही के फिजिशियन थे, और उसके बाद फिर वो इंटेलेक्चुअल और साइंटिस्ट भी बन गया. और ये दानिशमंद खान कौन थे? अर्मेनियन नॉबल. बर्नियर ट्रैवल टू सेवरल पार्ट ऑफ द कंट्री एंड रोट अकाउंट ऑफ व्हाट ही सॉ, frequently comparing what he saw in India with the situation in Europe. He dedicated his major writing to Louis XIV, the King of France, and many of his other works were written in the form of letters to influential officials and ministers. In virtually every instance, Bernier described what he saw in India as a bleak situation in comparison to development in Europe. As we will see, this assessment was not always accurate. However, when his work was published, Bernier writings became extremely popular. ये 17th century पेंटिंग है depicting Bernier in European clothes. Now, this is a painting depicting Tavernier. तो Tavernier और Bernier. Tavernier कौन थे? फ्रैंकोइस बर्नियर जो थे वो क्या थे? फ्रेंचमैन थे, डॉक्टर थे, दादा चकोर के टाइम पे आए थे। टेवर्नियर जो है वो फ्रेंच के ज्वेलर थे, 6 टाइम्स इंडिया में आए थे। ठीक है, उसके बाद फिर हम यहाँ बताते हैं ट्रैवलिंग विद द मुगल आर्मी. So Bernier often traveled with the army. This is an except from his description of the army's march to Kashmir. I am expected to keep 2 good Turkoman horses, and I also take with me a powerful Persian camel and a driver, a groom for my horses, a cook, and a servant to go before my horse with a flask of water in his hand, according to the custom of the country. I am also provided with every useful article such as tent of the moderate size, carpet, portable bed made of four very strong but light canes, a pillow, a mattress, round leather, a tablecloth used at meals, some few napkins of dyed cloth, 3 small bags with culinary utensils, which are all placed in a large bag. And this bag is carried in very capacious and strong double sack or net made of leather thong. This double sack likewise contains the provision, linen, and wearing apparel, both of the master and the servant. I have taken care to lay in a stock of excellent rice for 5 or 6 days' consumption, of sweet biscuit flavored with anise, a hub of lime and sugar. Nor have I forgotten a linen bag with a small iron hook for the purpose of suspending or draining dahi or curd, nothing being considered so refreshing in this country as lemonade and dahi. Barnier works were published in France in 1670 and translated into English, Dutch, German, Italian within the next 5 years. तो 1670 और 71 में इनके वर्क्स पब्लिश हो गए थे. बिटवीन 1670 and 2025 his accounts were reprinted 8 times in French, and by 1684 it had been reprinted 3 times in English. This was in marked contrast to the account in Arabic and Persian, which circulated as manuscript and was generally not published before 1800. तो पर्शियन और अरेबिक अकाउंट जो आपके इसके पहले हमने पढ़े थे, कौन से थे, इब्न बतूता और एक और थे एल्बरूनी. तो इनके अकाउंट दे वर रिटन इन अरेबिक, सो दे ट्रैवल दे वर सर्कुलेटेड एज मैन्यूस्क्रिप्ट. दे वर जनरली नॉट पब्लिश्ड बिफोर 1800. So the creation of the circulation of ideas about India, the writing of the European, and through the printing and the circulation of the above. Later, after 1751, Indians like Sheikh Itasamuddin and Mirza Abu Talib visited Europe and confronted this image that Europeans had of their society. They tried to influence it by producing their own version of matters. Making sense of an alien word, Alberoni and the Sanskritic tradition, overcoming barriers to understanding. As we have seen, travelers often compared what they saw in the subcontinent with the practice with which they were familiar. Each traveler adopted distinctive strategy to understand what they observed. Al-Biruni, for instance, was aware of the problem inherent in the task he had set for himself. He discussed several barriers that he felt obstructed understanding. The first among these was language. According to him, Sanskrit was so different from Arabic in merging that ideas and concepts could not be easily translated from one language into another. Second barrier he identified was the difference in religious belief and as well as the practice. The self-absorption and consequent insularity of the local population, according to him. ठीक है, they were self absorbed and insular. ठीक है, constituted the third barrier. What is interesting is that even though he was aware of these problems, Alberoni depended almost exclusively on the works of Brahmins, often citing passages from the Vedas, Puranas, Bhagavad Gita, Patanjali, Manusmriti, etc., to provide an understanding of the Indian society. Alberoni's description of the caste system. Alberoni tried to explain the caste system by looking for parallels in other society. He noted that in ancient Persia, 4 social categories were recognized: those of the knight and princes, monks, fire priests, lawyers, physicians, astronomers, and other scientists, and finally peasants and artisans. In other words, Henry suggests that the social division were not unique to India. At the same time, he pointed out that within Islam, all the men were considered equal, differing only in the observance of piety. In spite of his acceptance of the Brahminical description of the caste system, Alberoni disapproved of the notion of pollution. He remarked that everything which falls in a state of impurity strives and succeeds in regaining its original condition of purity. The sun cleanses the air. Salt in the sea prevents the water from becoming polluted. If it were not so, insisted Alberoni, life on earth would have been impossible. The conception of social pollution intrinsic to the caste system was, according to him, contrary to the laws of nature. God knows best. Travelers did not always believe what they were told. When faced with the story of a wooden idol that supposedly lasted for itna year, 2,16,432 years, everyone asked, how then could wood have lasted such a length of time, and particularly in a place where the air and the soil are rather wet? God knows the rest. God knows best. So it is a language with an enormous range. Al-Biruni describes Sanskrit as follows: if you want to conquer this difficulty, that is to learn Sanskrit, you will not find it easy because the language is of an enormous range, both in word and inflection, something like Arabic. It, calling one and the same thing by various names, the both original and derivative, and using one and the same word for a variety of subjects, which in order to be properly understood must be distinguished from each other by various qualifying epithets. So, in the this is Al-Biruni's account of the system of Varna. The highest caste are the Brahman, of whom the book of the Hindus tell that they were created from the head of the Brahman, and the Brahman is only another name of the force called nature, and the head is the highest part of the body. Brahman are the choice part of the whole genus. Therefore, the Hindus consider them as the very best of mankind. The next caste are the Kshatriya, who were created, as they say, from the shoulders and the hands of the Brahman. Their degree is not much below that of Brahman. After them, the Vaishyas, who were created from the thigh, the Shudra, who were created from the feet. Between the latter two classes, there is no very great distance, much however. As these classes differ from each other, they live together in the same town villages, mixed together in the same house and lodging. Now, as we have seen, Al-Biruni's description of the caste system was deeply influenced by a study of normative Sanskrit texts, which laid down the rules of governing the system from the point of view of the Brahmins. However, in real life, the system was not quite as rigid. For instance, the categories defined as antyacha, literally born outside the system, were often expected to provide inexpensive labor to both peasants and zamindar. Antyacha, literally born outside the system, he provided inexpensive labor to both the peasant and the zamindar. In other words, while they were often subjected to social oppression, they were included within the economic network. ठीक है? Now, Ibn Battuta and the excitement of the unbelievable. By the time the Ibn Battuta arrived in Delhi in the 14th century, the subcontinent was part of the global network of communication. ठीक है, जब इब्न बतूता आए थे तो कम्युनिकेशन अच्छा खासा बढ़ गया था. That's from China in the east to northwest Africa and Europe in the west. As we have seen, Ibn Battuta himself traveled extensively to the East land, visiting sacred sites, spending time with the learned men and rulers, often associated as Qazi, and enjoying the cosmopolitan culture of urban centers where people who spoke Arabic, Turkish, Persian, and other language, they shared ideas. They shared their information, anecdotes. These included stories about men noted for their piety, kings who could be both cruel and generous, and about the lives of the ordinary man and the woman. Anything that was unfamiliar was particularly highlighted in order to ensure that the listener or the reader was suitably impressed by the accounts of the distant yet accessible world. The coconut and the pan. Some of the best examples of Ibn Battuta's strategy of representation are written in the ways in which he described the account, the coconut and the pan, two kinds of plant produced that were completely unfamiliar to his audience. The following is how Ibn Battuta described the coconut. These trees are among the most peculiar trees in kind and most astonishing in habit. They look exactly like date palm, without any difference between them except that the one produces nut as its fruit and the other produces date. The nut of the coconut tree resembles a man's head, or in it are what looks like two eyes and a mouth, and the inside of it, when it is green in, looks like the brain, and attached to it is a fiber which looks like hair. They make from this cords which they sew up ship instead of using iron nails, and they also make from it cables for vessel. It will go to the description of the pan. The betel is a tree which is cultivated in the same manner as the grapevine. The betel has no fruit and is grown only for the sake of its leaf. The manner of its use is that before eating it, one takes areca nut. That is like this is like nutmeg that is broken up until reduced to small pellet, and one places these in his mouth and chews them. Then he takes the leaves of the betel, puts a little chalk on them, and masticates them along with the betel. Ibn Battuta Indian cities. Ibn Battuta found cities of the in the subcontinent full of exciting opportunities for those who had the necessary drive, resource, and skill. They were densely populated and prosperous, except for the occasional disruption caused by wars and invasion. तो फाउंडेशन ऐसे पढ़ने फुल ऑफ एक्साइटिंग अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ जिनके पास ड्राइव है रिसोर्स है स्किल है तो उनके लिए काफ़ी अपॉर्चुनिटी है दे वर डेंसली पॉपुलेटेड प्रॉस्परस एक्सेप्ट फॉर द ओकेजनल डिस्ट्रप्शन कॉज बाय वॉर्स एंड इन्वेजन इट अपीयर्स फ्रॉम इब्न बतूता's account that most cities had crowded street, bright and colorful market that was stacked with a wide variety of good. Ibn Battuta described Delhi as a vast city with a great population, the largest in India. Daulatabad in Maharashtra was no less and easily rivaled Delhi in size. This is an example in the account of Delhi, often spelled as Delhi in text of the period. The city of Delhi covers a wide area and has a large population. The rampart around the city is without parallel. The breadth of its wall is 11 cubit, and inside it are houses for the night sentry and gatekeepers. Inside the rampart, there are storehouses for storing edible magazine, ammunition, ballista, and siege machine. The grains that are stored in these rampart can last for a long time without rotting. In the interior of the rampart, horsemen as well as infantrymen move from one end of the city to another. The rampart is pierced through by windows which open on one on the side of the city, and it is through these windows that light enters inside. The lower part of the rampart is built of stone, the upper part of brick. It has many towers close to one another. There are 28 gates of this city which are called Darwaja. And of these, the Budaun Darwaja is the greatest. Inside the Mandvi Darwaja, there is a grain market. It adjacent to the Gul Darwaja, there is an orchid in the city of Delhi. Has a fine symmetry in which graves were domes over them, and those that do not have a dome have an arc for sure. In a symmetry, they show flowers such as the tuberose, jasmine, wild rose, and flower blossom here all season. This is an arc in Tughlaqabad, Delhi. The bazaars were not only places of economic transaction but also the hub of social as well as cultural activities. Most bazaars has a mosque, temple, and in some of them at least places were marked for public performance by dancer, musicians, singer. While Ibn Battuta was not particularly concerned with explaining the prosperity of town, historians have used his account to suggest that towns derive a significant portion of their wealth through the appropriation of surplus from villages. Ibn Battuta found Indian agriculture very productive because of the fertility of the soil, which allowed farmers to cultivate two crops a year. He also noted that the subcontinent has a well indicated with inter-Asian network of trade and commerce, with Indian manufacturers being in great demand in both West Asia, Southeast Asia, fetching huge profit for artisan merchants. Indian textile, particularly cotton cloth, fine muslin, silk, brocade, satin, were in great demand. तो silk भी चलता था, brocade, satin. In Battuta informed me that certain varieties of fine muslin were so expensive that they could be worn only by the nobles and the very rich. In Daulatabad, there is a marketplace for male and female singer which is known as Tarababad. It is one of the greatest and the most beautiful bazaar. It has numerous shops and every shop has a door which leads into the house of the owner. The shops are decorated with carpet, and at the center of the shop there is a swing on which sits the female singer. She is decked with all kinds of finery and a female attendant female singer, a swinger. In the middle of the marketplace, there stands a large cupola, which is carpeted decorated, in which the chief or the magician takes his place every Thursday after the dawn prayers, accompanied by a surveillance slave. The female singers come in successive crowd, sing before him, dance until the dusk, after which he withdraws. In this bazaar, there are mosques for offering prayer. One of the Hindu rulers alighted at the cupola every time he passed by this marketplace, and the female singer would sing before him. Even some Muslim rulers did the same. This is the ikat. Ikat weaving patterns such as this were adopted and modified at the several coastal production centers in the subcontinent and in Southeast Asia. Ikat weaving. ठीक है? Okay. So the state evidently took special measures to encourage merchants. if ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा merchant आए तो state उनको काफ़ी ज़्यादा ध्यान देता था. Almost all trade routes were well supplied with inns and guest house. Ibn Battuta was also amazed by the efficiency of the postal system, which allowed merchants to not only send information and remit credit across long distance but also to dispatch goods required at short notice. The postal system was so efficient that while it took 50 days to reach Delhi from Sindh, the new report of spies would reach the Sultan through the postal system in just 5 days. So this is how you know to describe the postal system. In India, the postal system is of two kinds. The horse post called Uluk is run by Royal Horses Station at a distance of every 4 miles. The foot post has 3 stations per mile. ठीक है. 4 माइल पे उलुक मतलब अगर हॉर्स पोस्ट है तो उसे उलुक कहते थे. 4 माइल पे उनका स्टेशन था. फुट पोस्ट है तो हर माइल पे हैज़ 3 स्टेशन पर माइल. इट इज़ कॉल्ड दवा एंड दैट इज़ 1/3 of a mile. Now at every third of a mile there is a well populated village. Outside that there are pavilions in which sit men with grinded lines ready to start. Each of them carries a rod 2 cubits in length with copper bells at the top. When the courier starts from the city, he holds the letter in one hand and the rod with his bells on the other, and he runs as fast as he can. When the men in the pavilion hear the ringing of the bell, they get ready. As soon as the courier reaches them, one of them takes the letter from his hand and runs at top speed, shaking the rod all the while until he reaches the next tower. At the same process continues till the letter reaches destination. This foot post is quicker than the horse post, and often it is used to transport the fruit of Khurasan, which are much desired in India. A Strange Union. The travelogue of Abdul Razak, that is written in 1440s, is an interesting mixture emotion. Abdul Razak Samarkandi, emotions and perception. On one hand, he did not appreciate what he saw in the port of Calicut, that is present-day Kochigode, in Kerala, which was populated by people the likes of whom I had never imagined, describing them as a strange nation. Later in his visit to India, he arrived in Mangalore, crossed the Western Ghat. Here he saw a temple that filled him with admiration. Within 3 leagues about 9 miles of Mangalore, I saw an idol house with the likes of which is not to be found in all over the world. It was a square, approximately 10 yards aside, 5 yards in height, all covered with cast bronze, with 4 porticos. In the entrance portico was a statue who, in the likeness of a human being, a full statue made of gold. It had two red ruby for eyes, so cunningly made that you would say it could see. What craft and what artisanship! Now, Bania and the degenerate East. If Ibn Battuta chose to describe everything that impressed and excited him because of his novelty, Francois Bania belonged to a different intellectual tradition. He was far more preoccupied with comparing and contrasting what he saw in India with the situation in Europe in general and France in particular. Focusing on situations which he considered depressing, his idea seems to have been to influence policymakers and the intelligentsia to ensure that they made what he considered to be the right decision. Mania's travels in the Mughal Empire is marked by detailed observation, critical insight, and reflection. His account contains discussion trying to place the history of the Mughals within some sort of universal framework. He constantly compared Mughal India with contemporary Europe, generally emphasizing the superiority of the latter. His representation of India works on the model of binary opposition, where India is presented as the inverse of Europe. He also uh, ordered the perceived differences hierarchically so that India appeared to be inferior to the Western world. The question of land ownership. According to Bania, one of the fundamental difference between Mughal India and Europe was the lack of private property in land in the former. Former मतलब मुगल इंडिया में कोई प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी इन लैंड नहीं थी. He was a firm believer in the virtues of a private property and saw crown ownership of land as being harmful for both the state and the people. He thought that in the Mughal Empire the emperor owned all the land and distributed it among his nobles, and that this had disastrous consequences for the economy as well as the society. This perception was not unique to Bania but is found in most travelers' account of the 16th as in the 17th century. Owing to crown ownership of land, argued Bania, landholders could not pass on their land to their children. So they were averse to any long-term investment in the sustenance and expansion of the production. क्योंकि उनको पता था कि इनके बेटों को जरूरी नहीं है कि वो पास ही हो, तो वो ज़्यादा investment नहीं करते थे in the sustenance and expansion of production. The absence of private property in land had therefore prevented the emergence of the class of improving landlord as in Western Europe with a concern to maintain or improve their land. It had led to the uniform ruination of जैसे कि agriculture constantly ruin हुआ है, excessive oppression of the peasantry and a continuous decline in the living standard of all sections of society except the ruling aristocracy. ठीक है. As an extension of this, Banya described Indian society as consisting of undifferentiated masses of impoverished people. ठीक है. That was undifferentiated mass. किसका? Impoverished people. They were subjugated by a small minority of a very rich and a powerful ruling class. Between the poorest of the poor and the richest of the rich, there was no social group or a class worth the name. Banya confidently asserted there is no middle state in India. This is then when how this then is how Banya saw the Mughal Empire. Its king was the king of beggars and barbarian. Its city and towns were rude and contaminated with ill air, and its field overspread with bushes and full of pestilential marriages, and all this was because of a nation crown ownership of land. Curiously, none of the Mughal official documents suggest that the state was the sole owner of the land. For instance, Abul Fazl, the 16th century official chronicler of Akbar's reign, described the land revenue as remuneration of sovereignty, that is, a claim made by the ruler on his subject for the protection he provided rather than as rent on land that he owned. It is possible that European travelers regarded such claims as rent because land revenue demands were often very high. However, this was actually not a rent or even a land tax, but a tax on the crop. Bunyan's description influenced the Western theorists from the 18th century onward. The French philosopher Montesquieu, for instance, used this account to develop the idea of Oriental despotism, according to which rulers in Asia, the Orient or the East, ठीक है, Orient in the East, they enjoyed absolute authority over their subjects, who were kept in conditions of subjugation and poverty, arguing that all land belonged to the king and their private property was non-existent. According to this view, everybody except the emperor and his nobles barely managed to survive. This idea was further developed as the concept of the ascetic mode of production by Karl Marx in the 19th century. He argued that in India and other Asian countries before colonialism, surplus was appropriated by the state. This led to the emergence of society that was composed of a large number of autonomous, egalitarian village community. Okay, that was an autonomous and egalitarian village community. Egalitarian village community. So this led to the emergence of society that was composed of a large number of autonomous egalitarian village communities. This imperial code presided over these village communities, respecting their autonomy as long as the flow of surplus was unimpeded. This was regarded as a stagnant system by Karl Marx. However, we will see this picture of rural society was far from true. In fact, during the 16th 17th century, rural society was characterized by considerable social and economic differentiation as well. ठीक है at one end of the spectrum were the big zamindars who enjoyed superiority rights in land, and at the other the untouchable landless labor. In between this was a big peasant who used hired labor and engaged in commodity production, and the smaller peasant who could barely produce for his subsistence. A more complex social reality. While Bernier preoccupation with projecting the Mughal state as tyrannical is obvious, as tyrannical is obvious, ठीक है, his description occasionally hint at a more complex social reality. For instance, he felt that artisans had no incentive to improve the quality of their manufactures since profit were appropriated by the state. Manufactures were consequently everywhere in decline. At the same time, he considered this that vast quantity of the world's precious metal flowed into India as manufactures were exported in exchange for gold and silver. He also noticed the existence of a prosperous merchant community engaged in long distance exchange. ठीक है. In fact, during the 17th century, about 15% of the population lived in town. So this was on average higher than the population proportion of urban population in Western Europe in the same period. In spite of this, Panay described Mughal city as camp town, by which he meant towns that owed their existence and dependent for their survival. So यहाँ पे एक बार फिर से पढ़ते. In fact, during the 17th century, about 15% of the population they lived in town. This was on average higher than the proportion of urban population in Western Europe in the same period. In spite of this, Bernier described Mughal cities as camp town, by which he meant towns that owed their existence and dependent for their survival on the imperial camp. He believed that these came into the existence when the imperial court moved in and rapidly declined when it moved out. Okay? So he suggested that it did not have a viable social and the economic foundation but were dependent on the imperial patronage only. As in the case of the question of land ownership, Bunny was drawing an oversimplified picture. There were all kinds of towns, manufacturing town, trading town, port town, and sacred centers, pilgrimage town, etc. Their existence is an index of the prosperity of the merchant communities and the professional classes. जो इतने towns exist कर रहे थे वो दिखाते हैं कि merchant community were very prosperous and that they was a professional classes. So merchants often had a strong community or kin ties and were organized into their own caste cum occupational bodies. In Western India, in west part of India, these group of merchants were called Mahajans and their chief the Seth. In urban centers such as Ahmedabad, the Mahajans were collectively represented by the chief of the merchant community who was called Nagar Seth. Other urban groups included professional classes such as physician, Hakim or Vaid, teacher, Pandit or Mullah, lawyers, vakil, painter, architect, musician, calligrapher, etc. While some depended on imperial patronage, many made their living by serving other patrons, while still others served ordinary people in crowded markets or bazaar. Okay? So before studying the condition of the woman, ये कुछ important चीज़ रह गई थी. So Bernier is perhaps the only historian to provide a detailed account of the working of the imperial karkhanas or the workshop. There was a large hall are seen at many places that are called karkhana or workshop for the artisan. In one hall, the embroiderers are busy employed, superintended by a master. In another, you see the goldsmith. In third, painters. In fourth, it varnishers in lacquer work. In fifth, joiners, turners, tailors, shoemaker. In sixth, manufacturer of silk, brocade, and a fine muslin. So artisans came every morning to their karkhanas where they remain employed the whole day, and in the evening they return to their home. In this quite regular manner, their time glides away, and no one aspiring for any improvement in the condition of life wherein it happens to be born. And this is a different socio-economic scenario. It is also an except from Bernier of both agriculture and crop production. It is important to observe that of this vast tract of country, a large proportion is extremely fertile. The large kingdom of Bengal, for instance, surprising Egypt itself, not only in the production of rice, corn, and other necessities of life, but of innumerable articles of commerce which are not cultivated in Egypt. For example, silk, cotton, indigo. There are also many parts of the Indies where the population is sufficiently abundant and the land pretty well tilled. tilled, and where the artisan, although naturally intolerant, is yet compelled by necessity or otherwise to employ himself in manufacturing carpet, brocade, embroideries, gold, silver cloth, and the various sort of silk and cotton good which are used in the country or exported abroad. It should not escape notice that gold and silver, after circulating in every other quarter of the globe, come in the length to be swallowed up, lost in some measures in Hindustan. This is the gold spoon. This is studied with the emeralds and rubies, an example of the dexterity of the Mughal artisans. This is also an excerpt from Banier. Banier warned that if European kings followed the Mughal model, their kingdom would be very far from being well cultivated and people so well built, so rich, so polite and flourishing as we see them. Our kings are otherwise rich and powerful, and we must avow that they are much better and more royally served. This would soon be king of desert, they would soon be the king of desert and solitude, of beggars and barbarians, such as those are whom I have been representing the Mughal. We should find the great cities and the great borough rendered uninhabitable because of ill air and to fall to ruin without anybody taking care of repairing them. The hillocks abandoned and the fields overspread with bushes filled with pestilent marishes, that is marshes, as has been already intimated. And except from Baniya description of the peasantry or the vast tract of country constituting the empire of Hindustan, many are little more than sand or barren mountains, badly cultivated, thinly populated. Even a considerable portion of the good land remains until for want of laborers, many of whom perish in consequence of bad treatment they experience from governors. The poor people, when they become incapable of discharging the demands of their rapacious lord, are not often deprived of their means of subsistence, but they are also made to lose their children, who are carried away as slow. Thus it happens that the peasantry, driven to despair by so excessive a tyranny, abandon the country. In this instance, Bunyan was participating in contemporary debates in Europe concerning the nature of state and society, and intended that a description of Mughal India would serve as a warning to those who did not recognize the merit of private property. Okay. Pelset, a Dutch traveler, visited the subcontinent. एक नाम है तो Dutch traveler का Pelset. During the early decades of the 17th century, like Bernier, he was shocked to see the widespread poverty. Poverty was so great, miserable, that the life of the people can be depicted or accurately described only as the home of a stark want and the dwelling place of bitter woe. Holding the state irresponsible, he says. So much is wrung from the peasant that even dry bread is scarcely left to fill their stomach. Okay, we have we are done with this. Um, yeah, we are done. Okay. Now, condition of women, slaves, sati, and lepers. Travelers who left written accounts were generally men who are interested in and sometimes intrigued by the condition of the women in the subcontinent. Sometimes they took social inequities for granted as natural state of affairs. For instance, slaves were openly sold in market like any other commodity and were regularly exchanged as gift. When Ibn Battuta reached Sindh, he purchased horses, camels, and slaves as gift for Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq. When he reached Multan, he presented the governor with a slave and a horse together with raisins and elements. Muhammad bin Tughlaq informs Ibn Battuta was so happy with the sermon of a preacher named Nasiruddin that he gave him 100,000 tanka and a 200 slave. So Muhammad bin Tughlaq इससे impressed हुए थे नसीरुद्दीन से उन्होंने उनको टंका कॉइन्स दिए थे और 200 स्लेव दिए थे. It appears from Ibn Battuta's account that there were considerable differentiation among the slaves. Some female slaves in the service of the Sultan were expert in music and dance, and Ibn Battuta enjoyed their performance at the wedding of the Sultan's sister. Female slaves were also employed by the Sultan to keep a watch on his nobles. Slaves were generally used for domestic labor, and Ibn Battuta found their service particularly indispensable for carrying women and men on palanquin or dola. Used for domestic labours, and Ibn Battuta found their service particularly indispensable for carrying women and men on palanquins or dola. The price of slaves, particularly female slaves required for domestic labor, was very low, and most families who could afford to do so kept at least one or two of them. Contemporary European travelers and writers often highlighted the treatment of the woman as a crucial marker of difference between the Western and Eastern society. Not surprisingly, Bernier chose the practice of sati for detailed description. He noted that while some women seemed to be embraced death cheerfully, others were forced to die. So, slave woman in Buddha, it is the habit of the emperor to keep with every noble, great or small, one of his slaves who spies on the noble. He also appoints female scavengers who enter the house unannounced, and to them the slave girls communicate all the information they possess. Most female slaves were captured in raids and expeditions. This is perhaps one of the most poignant description of Bhai Parnia, the child Sati. At Lahore, I saw a most beautiful young widow sacrifice who could not, I think, have been more than 12 years of age. The poor little creature appeared more dead than alive when she approached the dreadful pit. The agony of her mind cannot be described. She trembled and wept bitterly, but 3 or 4 of the Brahmins, assisted by an old woman who held her under the arm, and forced the unwilling victim towards the fatal spot, seated her on the wood, tied her hands and feet, lest she should run away, and in that situation the innocent creature was burned alive. I found it difficult to repress my feeling and to prevent their bursting forth into clamorous and unavailing rage. However, women's lives revolve around much else beside the practice of sati. Their labor was crucial in both agriculture and non-agriculture production. Women from merchant families participated in commercial activities, sometimes even taking mercantile dispute to the court of law. It therefore seems unlikely that women were confined to the private spaces of their home. You may have noted that travelers' account provide us with tantalizing glimpses of the lives of the men and women during these centuries. However, their observations were often shaped by the context from which they came. At the same time, there were many aspects of social life that these travelers did not notice. Also relatively unknown are the experiences and observations of men and possibly women from the subcontinent who crossed seas and mountains and ventured into lands beyond the subcontinent. What did they see and hear? How were their relations with peoples of distant landscape? What were the language they used? These and other questions will hopefully be systematically addressed by historians in the year to come. This is a sculpture panel from Mathura depicting travelers. Now finally timeline. Some travelers who left account. So 1973 1048 मोहम्मद इब्न अहमद अबू रेहान, ये नाम सुन लो, उज़्बेकिस्तान के मोहम्मद इब्न अहमद अबू रेहान अल बरौनी। 13th सेंचुरी में बात किए थे, कौन आया था? 1254 से 1323 मार्को पोलो फ्रॉम इटली। 14th सेंचुरी में 30477 1304 से 177 आए थे इब्न बतूता फ्रॉम मोरक्को। 1430 से 182 अब्दुल अल रज़ाक, मतलब 15th सेंचुरी में आए थे अब्दुल अल रज़ाक कमल अल दिन इब्न इशाक अल समरकंदी, ये समरकंद से अब्दुल अल रज़ाक समरकंदी। फिर ये आए थे 15th सेंचुरी में। 15th सेंचुरी में 1466 से 72 ईयर्स स्पेंट इन इंडिया, एक आए थे अफानासी निकितिन 15th सेंचुरी फ्रॉम रशिया। फिर 16th सेंचुरी की बात करते हैं, 1580 विजिट टू इंडिया, कौन आए थे? 1580 में डुआटे बाबोसा फ्रॉम पोर्टुगल। सैयद अली राइस फ्रॉम टर्की 1562 में। उसके बाद 1536 से 1600 एंटोनियो मोंसेराटे फ्रॉम स्पेन, एंटोनियो मोंसेराटे फ्रॉम स्पेन 1536 से 1600। 17th सेंचुरी की बात करते हैं, 1626 से 31 मोहम्मद वाली बाल्की फ्रॉम बल्क। 1600 से 67 पीटर मुंडी फ्रॉम इंग्लैंड। ये 17th सेंचुरी वाला एक बार ध्यान से देख लो। सबसे पहले बाल्की आए थे फ्रॉम बल्क, तो ये मोहम्मद वाली बाल्की 1626 से 31 1626 से 1631। फिर 1667 से पीटर मुंडी इंग्लैंड से आए थे। 1605 से 89 जीन बैप्टाइस्ट टेवनियर फ्रॉम फ्रांस। 1620 से 88 फ्रेंकोइस बर्नियर फ्रॉम फ्रांस। ठीक है, तो कौन बाद में आया था, फ्रेंकोइस बर्नियर कि टेवनियर? बर्नियर बाद में आए थे। ठीक है, ओके, डन विद इट।